Hey there, my friends. This is Dr. Anthony Balduzzi, and I want to welcome you to this new episode here on the Fit Mother Project podcast. Today, we're joined by guest expert Dr. Jannine Krause. She is a naturopathic doctor, an acupuncturist, and overall just a woman who is doing so much great work in the world to help other busy women age well and have fantastic health and vitality well into old age. Dr. J, as we call her, is also a paddleboard adventurer, a recovering stressaholic, and just someone who has a lot of practical wisdom on what it takes to get healthy. And I met Dr. J because I was actually a guest on her podcast called the Health Fix Podcast, which is a wonderful show that I'll mention throughout this episode. She has over 300 different episodes talking about all things health and wellness. And she's been a clinician practicing for over 17 years, and she's helped hundreds of women regain better health and vitality. And in today's episode, we really key in on some of her foundational thinking around aging and what she calls the five factors that are aging accelerators. We talk about inflammation, we talk about stress, metabolic dysfunction, gut microbiome stuff, as well as insulin resistance. So it's really cool to get some perspective from Dr. J on how all of this ties together and how all of us can live healthier lives with a body that's more free and open, that's working better, producing energy, and aging really well, which means we look good, we feel good, and we feel like we have a good sense of what we should be doing with our bodies. So this is a great conversation. I definitely consider it a power hour that I think you're really going to enjoy. And you're also going to get a sense of the kind of medicine that Dr. J practices, which is naturopathic medicine, a kind of holistic medicine that brings in so many different modalities, from acupuncture to nutrition to herbal medicine, and just looking at the body as the integrated whole that it actually is, and not just like, oh, you have cholesterol, here's a statin medication. It's like, wait a second, what's the root cause here, and how do we actually get something that's sustainable long term and not just popping another pill? So Dr. J is an expert at that, and I'm glad that we're welcoming her onto the show today. So let's get into today's episode with Dr. Jannine Krause. Dr. Jannine Krause, aka Dr. J, welcome officially to the Fit Mother Project podcast.
Thanks, Dr. Anthony.
This is fun, and I think this is one of those beautiful things about being in this new internet age, which I know when you started to practice, it wasn't the case that doctors were collaborating via podcasts, 17 years of your clinical experience. It was like maybe you called someone up and you share some case notes and stuff like that. But it's really amazing that we're here now, and you have an amazing podcast that I was so grateful and happy to have been a guest on, which is the Health Fix Podcast. So if anyone here wants to get like a really, really great podcast, I think you have over 300 episodes, they can check that out. And today I want to bring you on to talk about basically the process that you lead women through to help them age well. And I guess what that means, in my opinion, is helping their body systems work well with low inflammation, good cardiometabolic health, strength, vitality, good cosmetic and beauty. And you have like a really strong framework and program for that you've run many, many people through. So I'm excited to talk about this. And I think a nice way to lead into it is for you to share a little bit of your story, perhaps how you both got into medicine and how you became passionate about helping women age well, and just, why you do what you do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, yeah, I kind of fell into becoming a naturopath and acupuncturist. My mom was dealing with breast cancer and she was really fatigued, and her naturopathic doctors were like, hey, go see an acupuncturist. Coincidentally, at the same time, I was getting my driver's license. And so I had my learner's permit. So I wanted to drive anywhere, anytime. So I literally drove her to all of her sessions with the acupuncturist and with the naturopath. And I just found it like incredibly like mind blowing. Let me put it that way. As a kid, you're like, doctors, whatever, I'm going to ignore it. But I'm like, wow, they're doing so many things with her. And saw her like go in for acupuncture, dragging, looking kind of gray and ashen, and then comes out and she's back to life. And I'm like, what kind of weird things are they doing in there? So, and at the time, I grew up in the Midwest. So it's acupuncture at that time in the early 90s was kind of still woo-woo and hippie here. And so of course, I was kind of a little bit, under that understanding that it was weird. So, and being a kid, you're like, what the heck? But the doc was really cool, noticed that I was super interested in it. And he took me around and would show me other patients and tell people that I was his assistant. He was so cute. So I got to learn a lot about acupuncture. And then with the naturopaths, they just kind of brought me in too and showed me different things they were doing with my mom. And I was like, wow, I go to my mom's doctor and she gets one thing, chemo. And I go to these folks and we've got all kinds of tools in the toolbox. And I'm like, this is pretty cool.
Yeah.
I like it. So that kind of got me into the whole naturopathic medicine and acupuncture thing. And then as I got older, as I started to see my mom's health decline, she eventually did pass after 10 bouts of cancer, and
Wow.
having lots of conversations with her about her breast health, it dawned on me that even though she was a nurse, she didn't have a lot of foundational information about how to take care of her health and how to access care. She found a lump in her breast, and the doc was like, "Oh, it's not that big of a deal. You can wait a year." Well, it went from probably stage 1 to stage 4 in a matter of a year. Had she known to get thermography, had she known, that there are better ways to eat, yes, the naturopaths had her on certain particular ways of eating, but no one was really talking about detoxing hormones per se at that point, and working
Mm-hmm.
on other things she could have done. And so unfortunately, she passed, and in my mind I was like, if she would have known there was thermography, if she would have known that she could have done an independent
Yeah.
ultrasound, maybe she'd still be alive, and maybe other women, might benefit from this
Yeah.
information too. So yeah, that's how it all started.
That's really, really powerful and interesting. And I mean, I think like something like breast cancer, which affects many, many women, is something that this naturopathic medicine, holistic medicine, is just so equipped to help on many deep levels beyond just the therapies. And what's interesting as I reflect on my own life is my father passed away from cancer, and I was also exposed to acupuncture because after he had brain surgery, one of the things that I found fascinating is to help him regain neurologic function after they cut out parts of his brain. He would get acupuncture treatments, and it actually legitimately helped. I saw his nervous system and his motor control begin to wake up through that process. So it's cool that acupuncture was a way that you and I both found this. It was like a really nice entry point.
Yeah.
Now I want to talk about aging
Mhm.
and aging well, particularly for busy moms and those that are getting into 40s, 50s, 60s. Like, you have this pretty much nailed. And I know it's like multifactorial and everyone needs to ultimately put in the work, but you have a really strong framework for how this works and the different categories to look at that I want to get into. And also, you practice what you preach and you look fantastic. You have great energy always when I speak with you. So it's obviously you're putting it into your life. So there's a lot of integrity behind what you say. So I want people to really take weight in your words. Now, from some of your materials that I've read, there are 5 aging accelerators that you speak about:
Mhm.
inflammation, stress, metabolic dysfunction, microbiome imbalance, your gut microbiome, and insulin resistance. Those are the 5. And I want to dive into these and ideally like paint a landscape for people so they understand like how current lifestyle and most people's lifestyles is creating problems in these areas, but maybe also what we can do in each of those. So if you'd be so happy, please kick us off with inflammation. How is inflammation related to aging? And feel free to give us some good old naturopathic education on like understanding the inflammation process and what healthy inflammation is versus unhealthy. Just take it away, please, on that.
Sure, sure. So obviously, inflammation right now is a hot topic. A lot of people talk about aging, but yeah, do we really know what it is? In terms of inflammation, when we have an injury, our body will become inflamed to heal it up. We'll get more white blood cells to the area.
Mm-hmm.
We'll have more histamines coming. We'll have increased circulation and maybe
Mm-hmm.
even some swelling in that area. But when it becomes your whole body starts to swell, you end up getting rashes and you're
Yeah.
like, what in the world's going on? Now we've got a systemic thing going on. And unfortunately, with inflammation, it really, over and over again, I've found that it's boils down to a certain amount of inflammation the body can deal with. Meaning,
Mm-hmm.
you're eating foods that have seed oils, right? For example, or we're eating out, exposing ourselves to toxins. Like, say we're drinking wine, and it's a habit, and yeah, it's nice to relax, but now we're noticing that we're not feeling so great from it the next day. We're just becoming more sensitive to things. We're thinking, gosh, it seems like I'm allergic to this food or that food. I know we'll say allergic, but meaning sensitive. And so it
Mm-hmm.
eventually builds kind of like a barrel over time. And then to the point where we get this overflowing where the body starts to have aches and pains. We're starting to just feel like crap, versus a better term. And we're gaining weight and we're puffy and we're like, what in the heck is happening? This is the point where inflammation has gone beyond being controlled to uncontrolled. And it really does boil
Mm-hmm.
down to a lot of underlying stuff that we kind of have an idea, I think, about it now, Dr. Anthony, but I think a lot of people
Yeah.
are not coming to terms with how much our stress from our life, our mental thoughts, and even our environment are having play here. And so I'll have a lot of folks come to me
Yeah.
and maybe you have folks too like this, that they're like, I'm at my wit's end. I'm eating healthy. I'm eating what I was told that's healthy. Maybe we're into the low fat, milks and dairies and things. And, and perhaps we're doing some exercise, and perhaps we're maybe in the other side of things and a lot of exercise, running marathons, things of that nature. And we're like, man, I'm doing all the things, but I'm aging fast. I'm swelling. My everything hurts. My skin hurts. And it's like, whoa, what the heck do I do here? So,
Hmm.
probably you as I with naturopathic medicine and how we look at things, we're like, okay, clearly there's a whole body system that's affected. What affects the whole body? Your
Yeah.
nervous system and the vagus nerve.
Hmm.
So I
Yeah.
I like to look at that first.
So that's like really how categories 1 and 2, category one
Yeah.
being inflammation and 2 stress, like play a huge role. I mean, they're like massively connected, let alone the fact that the category 2 stress is going to impact our food decisions. We don't sleep as well, more unhealthy inflammation and stuff like that. I want to get into like, inflammation, drill down a little bit more
Yeah.
and talk about like what you think like some of the main triggers are for people. I know for me, as a guy who has very dialed in good health routines, the main things that I can do to cause inflammation myself are, one, probably like not sleeping or recovering well, but two, eating the wrong kinds of foods. Like
Hmm.
there are certain foods for my body, if I eat too much dairy or too much wheat or certain things, absolutely cause inflammation. I see it in terms of like bloating, water weight gain, retention, just not feeling good, feeling kind of blah. So I know if I want to create inflammation, I can eat certain things. And if I actually fast or eat the right kinds of foods, I don't feel like the inflammation switch gets like turned off or in a healthy thing. So speak to me about what you
Yeah.
think some of the common inflammatory triggers and like how even quote unquote healthy foods kind of plays into different people and what they're eating.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You hit it. Yes, wheat and dairy. Some people, it's a corn thing. Some folks will, have some
Hmm.
tortilla chips and guac, and they're like, man, every time I do
Yeah.
that, I feel awful. Or for women in particular, what I find overall is if it's chips and kind of more of the savory things, the inflammation shows up as swelling, and sometimes swelling in the ankles,
Hmm.
sometimes the belly. Sugary stuff,
Yeah.
the rings get tight.
Yeah.
And that's another really
Hmm.
hardcore symptom. And joint feel like they're crunchy, don't move as well. That's
Yeah.
another huge one. And this is why part of my programs, I have a lot of tracking, and I know you do too, to help people kind of connect. Like these, I do this and this happens. Another one, like you said, is staying up late. But also I think for a lot of folks, we're working long hours. Some days we
Yeah.
have more mental taxing hours. And
Hmm.
I have found that mental, like stronger mental days where we're like doing, I call it mental gymnastics, we will end up having more inflammation. And for a lot of women, it can show up even as puffiness under the eyes when there's been a lot more thought processes going on throughout the day. It's not just foods. Obviously alcohol is going to be a big factor, and sometimes how much is a biggie
Yeah.
too. And the other ones that I really find with some of my folks that are, let's call it weekend warriors, they'll go out and
Hmm.
bang out like a really long hike and then can't move as well for the next week or two. And
Yeah.
that can be a big like wake up call, because unfortunately, we have a system with our bodies that we have to figure out how can we recover better. So those are some of the more common things. I will also see, and this might be for certain folks a little bit of a wake up call too, is that certain environments, meaning environments that are more dense with electromagnetic frequencies. You might have a friend
For
that
sure.
has a house next to a cell phone tower or something. I found that days where you're on the phone more. And so looking at that
Yeah.
kind of thing too is really huge. And for women, it can be migraines in that department. It could be twitching
Yep.
of the eyes that can kind of come in. Also a long
Hmm.
day on your computer. So those are some of the ones that I commonly see.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're seeing these as well, but I'm guessing
For
they're
sure.
probably pretty common.
Yeah. And I think like it becomes like a whole lifestyle awareness to be to identify what your triggers are, and the tracking is helpful on that.
Yeah.
Personally, I also feel like I'm always thinking for most people, they should have some in slot good natural anti-inflammatories that can just be a part of their
Mhm.
like their buffer system. So whether that's getting the good omega-3 fatty acids through supplement or cold water fatty fish or something like that, hemp seeds, chia seeds, or whether that is taking a bioavailable curcumin product or
Mhm.
something like that, seems
Mhm.
like good options. Do
Yeah.
you, for people in your programs or people that you support, Do you recommend someone take like just like a basic natural anti-inflammatory as like kind of a part of just well-being in that age bracket?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And one of the
Hmm.
things that I tie it to too for women in particular is I have women who are still getting their periods, tracking their periods, because we can have different
Hmm.
levels of sensitivity and inflammation depending on if we're in the, follicular first half of the period and if we're in ovulation compared to the luteal phase. And so, yeah, I use a lot of turmeric, and I use a lot of what's known as systemic enzymes. And those guys
Hmm.
seem to also be really big game changers for folks. I'm guessing you probably
Yeah.
do that as well.
For sure. And I think I want people to really understand what these are. Is like
Yeah.
people have probably gone to different stores and seen like digestive
Uh-huh.
enzymes, but there's a certain class of enzymes, various ones that break down proteins in the body. You take them on an empty stomach and they're like really powerful for breaking down a whole bunch of bad stuff. Like people who have clotting disorders, there's a lot of enzymes like nattokinase, lumbrokinase, like that can help thin the blood. So it's really cool that you use the systemic enzymes. And if someone wants to take enzymes, I'd love for you to get some take on that, but also like know that these are empty stomach things, typically like first thing in the morning or without food is going to be the way to get the most benefit.
Absolutely, absolutely. And, for certain women, just to kind of take it to the perimenopausal side of things, I will often have
Hmm.
women look at their cycle and when the estrogen is typically going to be higher and when it drops off, targeting it depending on
Hmm.
how you feel. Because some women going into ovulation will start to feel aches, pains, puffy. And I'm like, this is the time to do those systemic
Yeah.
enzymes. Like, no, it's a great time. And then heading back into the period again to that week before. And like you said, yeah, I pair it with when someone's fasting, or I'll do it overnight
Hmm.
if need be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Mhm.
Now, let's get into like the second pillar. We just covered
Mhm.
inflammation well, stress. Now, you mentioned like we all kind of a concept of what stress is. Tell us how this like plays into like health span, lifespan, and of course, we'll get into some things that you think are good for helping people recover and create more resilience in the nervous system.
Absolutely. So, my take on stress really is that a lot of us are not aware of the impact that it truly is having on us. We can feel stress, we might feel overwhelmed, and we'll be like, yeah, I'm so stressed out. But when we're not in a state where everything, we're aware of it, it's harder for folks to really pinpoint how they may be still stuck in fight or flight mode. So, for those of you who are
Hmm.
listening, our autonomic nervous system, I call it the automatic nervous system, it is in charge of whether we are in fight or flight or freeze mode, which for a lot of ladies, metabolism wise, that can be where we can get stuck and be really frustrated with our weight and how we look. And then we have the other side, the rest, the digest, and chill side, which is your parasympathetic state. This is the state we want to be
Yeah.
in more often, hands down.
Yeah.
So what I actually see this as long term. The more that we're stuck sympathetic, the more the body thinks it's running marathons all day. Well, if anyone
Yes.
listening has ran a marathon all day, you know how you feel afterwards and probably for a couple days afterwards.
Hmm.
So imagine that compounded by 40, 50, 60 years.
Yeah.
What kind of wear and tear would that do on a body, let alone a
Totally.
car if we went that many miles?
Yeah.
So I think of it as compounded, but then I also think about the nervous system in an energetic way. And the way my Midwest brain has broken this down and found it to be really useful to think about is that we are energetic beings. We have ions like sodium and potassium and chloride. They all have
Hmm.
charges.
Yep.
When we
Yep.
have too much stress for too long, our charges get off. Now, if we can't recharge ourselves, much like our batteries or how we plug something in, now we've got issues.
Yep.
And I think that compounds with the inflammation because we can't move fluids across the gut, across the brain, across our
Yep.
nerves to create nerve signaling too. So I'm really big into ions and cell salts
Hmm.
and homeopathics that help
Yeah.
with our charges as a whole.
For sure. And to bring it back to cancer, what they found is like a lot of cancer cells have disruption in their negative healthy charge. They become more relatively positive too. So, like on a cellular level, this is all that inflammation is manifesting as a change in voltage on a cellular level. You're losing voltage. And that's also why we know a lot of these good things like connecting and grounding and earthing and like the things that make us feel good when we're outside are often like working on these voltages, let alone like minerals and all this stuff. So it's beautiful how it does all kind of come back to uh, passing electrons and electricity and voltage differentials, and our cells like
Yeah.
know what they want to do. It's just the stress is crushing us. And I think also of like animals that are very like that don't live long lives, like a mouse.
Mhm.
Mouse is like a really nervous creature, fast heart rate, always looking that it's something is going to eat it, doesn't live a long time, very sympathetic drive, versus like a tortoise. These things live to like 100 years. They are straight chilling. They have an armored shell and they're just eating lettuce and like walking around. Like they're in a rest and digest. And I like to think is like if you're putting on the gas all the time, you're really burning your lifeline and your wick down. And when those stress hormones are high, it's breaking down your collagen in your skin. It's causing different hormones to be metabolized differently. So that's where it's fascinating, where it comes down to like physical stress, which could be exercise or lack of sleep, or just pushing really hard, having a mentally taxing day. And then there's this other side of like mental emotional
Mhm.
relationship to our lives that's we create this like psychosomatic driven stress. So for you, I'd really love to ask, because you do so many things, your programs, your clinic, your outdoor adventures and all the stuff like you do. How have you learned to like relate to your life in a way to like reduce maybe the mental and emotional stress burden, and just to become more at peace with your life, like that side of things, not just like sleep more, do these kinds of exercises?
I love that you asked me that because honestly, some of why I'm here educating women today is because I literally at the peak of just before COVID really was so stressed out, so burnt out. Practice was, cranking. I have lots of people, and I was at the brink of like complete burnout. And I had to change my exact thought process. And you beat yourself up a lot when you're a naturopathic doctor. You're like, I know better than this. I know that I, need to be
Yeah.
outside. I need to do these things. And so literally I had to become a different person when it came to
Hmm.
taking care of me, because as women, we are very driven to take care of everybody else
Hmm.
but ourselves. It's like in our DNA, I swear. We've been primed in.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's hard. It's really hard to break it. I mean, I probably was in burnout about 2 years before I actually really realized it, to be honest.
Yeah.
And so really the best things for me was going, okay, who do I have to become to be able to take care of others, but also still have my enjoyment for life? Because I was just living, but I
Hmm.
wasn't experiencing at at all.
Yeah.
So what I do now is I every morning I wake up, I'm like, okay, got to get the workout on, because that is for me fuel for me.
Hmm.
I I am
Yeah.
I have to do it. And there was no excuses on that. And so I had that as a foundation. But for folks that are looking for something a little more unique than, oh, I work out, my other side of things is I had to make sure that I built into every single day breaks where I got outside, and if the weather was good, I was out there with my shoes off, or if the weather wasn't, I was out there
Hmm.
and I was in the dirt, and I was playing with my garden.
Hmm.
And this is,
Yeah.
I know not everybody loves to grow and do things of that nature. You have to know, like, what is it that you love, you want to do, and what is it that when you're sitting there and you're like, I just want to be outside, or I just want to do this, go for
Hmm.
that and build it into your day. And so I had to become a person that was okay with taking breaks during the day, because I used to look at people who would take breaks,
Yeah.
they're out there smoking. I'm like, oh, they're so lazy. Turns out they might have been smarter. They might have been. So that's, I mean, really what it was is
Yeah,
becoming a different person.
and you built it in.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I love that. You built in these intentional like self-care times,
Mhm.
and it can look many different ways.
Mhm.
And it's fascinating because I think we all know intuitively when we're not living in a way that is filling our cup up, and we're just pouring out and we're feeling more depleted and more depleted. So it's like it's all about finding these. They don't have to be dramatic gestures like you take a week off and do something. They can be the small micro moments. And I'll give another plug for oftentimes, just due to the human geometry of how we're designed, getting out in nature, fresh air, sunlight, good water, like take a walk, like these things are very, very helpful. Have you done any like a prayer, journaling, meditation, anything like this to start to like analyze your thinking patterns and maybe some of your ego structures, personality structures? Has that been a part of your life at all?
Yes. Yes, it had to be. It had to be, because this brain was wired real hard to push myself into the ground. I
Hmm.
mean, it was. And
Yeah.
so Abraham Hicks, God love her,
Hmm.
a lot of that work. I did some brain rewiring work with Bob Doyle. I did a lot of work with John Assaraf too. And folks
Hmm.
who are listening, these are three folks who are all about looking at your source and looking at yourself and going, okay, how can I work on being happy every day? What can I do to change my energetic vibe to feel better every day? So, yes, I did a lot of that. And now
Hmm.
it's kind of come down to when I wake up in the morning before I get out of bed, I will focus on like, usually it's my fan or something in the bedroom and like focus on that and just let the thoughts kind of come in so I get my good downloads for the day. And then I also
Yeah.
use walking quite a bit as a meditation to just slow me down because otherwise I am, that part of me is still there. I just had to rewire how it works.
Hey, it's Dr. Ray. I want to quickly pause this episode to thank you so much for listening to this Fit Mother Project podcast. I am just blown away at how amazing this podcast has become, all the powerful stories, all the great expert interviews, and I am so grateful for you for tuning in and being here with everything we're creating here at the Fit Mother Project. And I just wanted to pause to acknowledge you and thank you again for listening. Please keep listening and tuning in to all the great stuff we're doing here at the FMP. Let's get back to today's episode. That was great. And I like everyone who is listening to this, you can also like rewind, skip back and write down some of those names, Abraham Hicks, John Assaraf, and I wasn't sure of the other one, but like overall, very, very good resources to start to look at. Now, to keep us on track of our 5 categories of aging, we've
Yeah.
covered inflammation and stress. We have 3 that are very related: metabolic dysfunction, microbiome imbalance, and insulin resistance. And I think like, let's talk about metabolic dysfunction. And I think you will be talking about insulin resistance and probably
Sure.
even microbiome imbalance. So this might become like a hybrid thing, but like, what does it mean to have metabolic function? And what does it mean to have metabolic dysfunction? How does this show up in people? And like, how is it also showing up at a population level, not just with individuals, but what are we seeing right now with like the standard American? And what does it mean to have metabolic dysfunction?
Sure, sure. The standard American right now has the slowest metabolic function in the universe. And where it's coming from, where I know it sounds terrible, but it is what it is. And really where it's coming from on a foundational level is we're looking at a liver and cells from the liver
Mm-hmm.
and your cells in general that are not making energy for you and not detoxing well for you. They're kind of sluggish.
Yeah.
And
Mm-hmm.
you could just look around. Every time I go out in public, I'm more and more looking at the size of folks and how people's ankles are so swollen. And I'm not judging. I'm looking
Yeah.
at it going like, oh my God, how can I help? Like
Mm-hmm.
this kills me. So that's kind of the big level of where I'm seeing things show up. And then if we dial it in, when I talk about metabolic health, I'm talking about circulation as a foundation here
Yeah.
because obviously acupuncture, Chinese medicine, for those of you who are familiar, we talk a lot about qi and blood flow. So energy and blood flow.
Mm-hmm.
Circulation has to happen. If it's not, we're going to have a slow metabolism because one, the body gets used to that slowness. But two, if you're not just pumping the blood,
Mm-hmm.
we have some issues. And so circulation as a whole is something I see and I'll see it in folks' skin. You'll see it in ankles. You'll see it,
Mm-hmm.
someone does take
Yeah.
their shoes off, like they're purple or they're varicose veins. You're going,
Yeah.
oh, and one of the things that I really like to call out is what's happening in your feet and what's happening in your varicose veins. This is a backup of your liver. This is your liver,
Yeah.
folks. You think of it as circulation, solely, but this is circulation through your liver. And so when I talk about all of the metabolic, what's a good metabolism versus a dysregulated metabolism, I'm looking at a
Mm-hmm.
good metabolism has good circulation. So this means not only are we getting
Yep.
blood flow moving, we're also breathing well, which I didn't mention
Yeah.
before about one of the things that I had to become a better breather too, to help myself. Breathing, like who would have thought, getting all excited, who would have thought a basic function of life would cause you to have less cellular metabolic activity? Go figure.
Right.
So, it's something in naturopathic school, it didn't click for me. It didn't. And now it totally has. And I think as a whole, folks who have good metabolisms are good breathers. They're good movers.
Mm-hmm.
And they
Yep.
have balance in terms of course, diet with watching the sugars, but also we think so much, a lot of women put so much weight on the thyroid. And
Yep.
really the thyroid I think the casualties we're having in society right now with so much hypothyroidism, this is toxicity. This is this
Yeah,
isn't
for
that
sure.
folks, have so much genetics to
Broken
develop.
thyroids at large. Yeah.
Right. Because, and I'm sure you've seen this too, is like a lot of times, folks will come in and say, my doc told me my thyroid levels are normal. Well, yeah, because your thyroid probably works fine. It's your cells. And so I talk a lot about cellular hypothyroidism to the point where
Hmm.
this is a metabolic dysfunction here. And folks, it's, yes, you might need more selenium. Yes, you could benefit from watching the goitrogenic foods, but honestly, a lot of times it boils down to circulation and breathing
Yeah.
and simple stuff. So, I look at that a lot, and I see that as kind of one of the mismatches there. So that plays a lot out in metabolism as a whole, is what your capability on a cellular level is to convert T4. So the what's coming out of the thyroid is your thyroid hormone, to T3 for those of you guys who are listening, and then your uptake.
Hmm.
I will run those labs all day long
Hmm.
just to see, like, is it a cell thing? Because so many people, and I'm sure you see this too, they take copious amounts of thyroid hormone replacement and
Yeah.
nothing's happening at all. And for women, it's our weight's not coming off. We're getting frustrated. Our hair is falling out, and it's like,
Hmm.
what the heck? So, yeah. Yeah, that's kind of how I see the difference between a healthy metabolic system. We've got a good, and dare I say this, a good cellular thyroid function. And I care
Yeah.
about the thyroid, but good cellular thyroid function, good balance of the blood sugar, healthy liver,
Yep.
and healthy blood flow. Those are like my four there. And then we'll get into microbiome in them later.
Nice. I mean, that was a really beautiful summary. I want to ask you very specifically, like what it means, because I know someone's thinking this, to like be a better breather, because you talked
Yes.
about how foundational oxygen is. So like what is good breathing in your opinion? What did you need to change and learn about your breath, and how would you suggest people start to become more aware and improve their breathing? Because we know this whole oxygen thing is kind of important for cellular health, and like we need to be able to do it in a way that works and is parasympathetic and is healthy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, what I mean by becoming a better breather is really being aware of how you breathe in the first place. I'll give you my backstory. I would hold my breath. I was really great at like not breathing for a while, and then I'd just sigh out of nowhere. And people would be like, my assistant at my office would always be like, "Are you gonna take a breath today?" It was strange where I would hold. Now, granted, there's some theories in which holding your breath is a good thing. And I did take training with Patrick McEwen from the Oxygen
Yeah.
Advantage so that I could be a better breather. And I also found that in fitness, I always sucked at figuring out where to breathe with weights. Like I'd be in the bottom of a
Hmm.
squat with a bar and being like, am I supposed to breathe or not? I don't know. Oh God, I'm just gonna go, So that was my other clue. And my coaches were like, yeah, you suck at breathing. So becoming a better breather meant me learning a little bit about how breathing works. And I was never quite a mouth breather. And I mean this with all the love in my heart for those of you that breathe a little bit more through your mouth. But I did have to learn how to breathe more through my nose. And I did have to learn with mouth breathing
Hmm.
in terms of fitness, because I did do that a little bit if I was
Hmm.
running or something a little bit more intense. So I found that breathing through my nose worked better for me. Not ideal for everybody, but there's some books out there that, you take your own opinion on it. But I found that I had to be conscious about taking deeper breaths and working with rhythmic styles of breathing, because I
Hmm.
tended to be short with breaths. And then when I wasn't short, I just was holding my breath. And so over
Hmm.
time, I found that my carbon dioxide levels on my labs actually went up, which is something that I will clue into when I see folks' labs and the carbon dioxide levels off in their and not being in a good range. I'm going, you're messing with your pH balance when you don't breathe well.
Yeah.
That's where we get to
Hmm.
on that, and circulation. But yeah, I literally had to go through a course to teach myself how to breathe better, because all the yoga that I had done in
Hmm.
the past, it didn't work. And I'll be honest, I wasn't great at yoga. I was in the uncoordinated yoga class. But it's,
Yeah.
I really do recommend folks test out their breathing. There's something called the Bolt score. If you guys look at the
Hmm.
oxygenadvantage.com, you'll find the Bolt score there, and it will tell you how long, you could take normal deep in and, breath in, breath out with your nose, and then holding your breath, see how long you can hold. And now this might sound weird because I said I was holding my breath before, but what I was doing was breathing shallow, not taking good deep breaths. It was like shallow breaths hold, shallow breaths hold. And we need the deeper breaths to help balance this out. So that was a lot into breathing.
Yeah.
I don't know if you wanted that much
No,
information.
it's a great, no, I did. I mean, I think it's so foundational, right? It's so simple that we overlook it because it just happens automatically. And yet it's really power for our cells. And I think it's another plug to kind of stack in this awareness of breathing into the concept of taking work breaks, into the concept of getting outside and getting grounded, or taking, getting in your garden or whatever. But like, if you're not always aware of what your breathing's like when you're working, but like you can start to create more awareness, and then it can shift in time, right? We're breaking old neurologic patterns and we're getting new ones. And I think what you find when you do start breathing, I'm going to make a strong vote for primarily through your nose.
Hmm.
I know high intensity exercise may make that so that's not the case, but the nose breathing increases nitric oxide and is so helpful, and it keeps you in a more parasympathetic state. So that's
Yeah.
good. And then I'll also make another plug for some kind of like prayer, meditation, or contemplative practice where you actually like very intentionally get connected into the body and the breath. And for me, now that I've done this for so many years, I kind of feel like it's a nice little like home that I'm always, part of my awareness is always in. I'm in my body. I'm feeling the rhythmic breath. It's slowed down, which honestly correlates with a slower, healthier heart. Your heart doesn't need to work as hard in terms of beats per minute when you're getting more oxygen from more complete and proper breathing. So there's so many cool benefits to all of that. Now, microbiome and insulin resistance, these are another two things. I think we'll do insulin resistance first
Sure.
because it's a super hot topic. We're now learning like, oh man, like turns out that when your insulin's not regulated well, not only are you experiencing weight gain, but cognitive decline, hormone issues. And it's a byproduct of this like high sugar processed food to eating too frequently kind of lifestyle that so many of us are on. So speak into that, insulin resistance and longevity, and also maybe inform us on like how you eat and how you like to suggest people eat to have healthy insulin. This could be types of foods as well as maybe timing. Let's speak into what we can do to have healthy insulin signaling and why that matters.
Sure, sure. So yeah, I run in like fasting insulin labs on everyone that comes into my practice because I want to know this data on folks because I want to know like if you aren't making enough, insulin, because that can be a factor. There are a few folks that have that, but then most folks, unfortunately, will be on the very high end of insulin and will have hemoglobin A1Cs, which is kind of like your blood sugar over time of sorts. I like to think of it as how sticky is the sugar in your blood grabbing your hemoglobins. So
Mm-hmm.
for that, I will see a lot of folks too right on that border of not quite diabetic, pre-diabetic, or pre-diabetic slash not quite pre-diabetic. There's a lot of borderline situations going on. So
Yeah.
what I see it as is two things. One, a lot of women are over consuming some processed carbs that are considered healthy. Things like rice crackers. They seem benign.
Yeah.
Depending on what kinds, they might be minimal, in terms of ingredients. But unfortunately, when you get a little emotional, sometimes an alien takes over and the whole package goes away and you have no idea what happened. That can be some
Yeah.
of what's going on there. And pair it with, back to the emotional eating stress response thing. This is a very big hand in hand thing that I see. Now, another big thing that I see too is we're looking at this rise in plant-based alternative foods.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I cringe. I cringe.
How do you really feel about those?
Yeah. I could write a very large essay on it. But really the thing is the fake butters, the fake cheeses, the fake,
Yeah.
things. You guys, this is plastic. This is seed oils and plastic, and it's inflaming you and it messes with insulin. So here's the crazy thing that I see. Some women will be very low carb in terms of their diet and they still have insulin resistance. What in the heck's going on? It's the seed oils. And it's the plant-based stuff like the fake cheeses and the fake butters. And I'll see it over and over again. And it's because the liver gets bogged down. Now, obviously, we also have another phenomenon that folks probably have been clued into. We know that high fructose corn syrup isn't great, but unfortunately it shows up in a lot of our foods. You got to read your freaking labels, guys. You have to.
Yeah.
There's so many like corn syrup, and sugar in the same thing, and it's a carb meal. What do you think is going to happen? It's like
Yep.
mainlining this stuff. So, and I
Yeah.
think, as I mentioned before, the biggest thing for women who are trying to eat well and they're doing, they're quote doing all the things, we don't tie in that we crave these foods with all the I call them insulin resistance foods. We crave them when we're emotionally stressed, when we're
Yep.
at the end of a long day. And so now we have a twofold factor that your higher cortisol levels that are already going to have your blood sugar up, then you eat these things, now you've got double trouble in that side of things. And so it took me a long time, I will be honest, to realize that a lot of my quote health foods may have been jacking with me and my weight and my metabolism.
Yeah.
And so it took me to go, oh, wow, okay, why do I have insulin resistance? Because for the most part, my diet, I eat veggies, I eat lean proteins, I eat a lot of game meat these days since I live in Wisconsin most of the time. There's lots of venison that our neighbors will trade for all kinds of stuff. We don't hunt, but the
Hmm.
food's good. So I shifted towards eating a lot in that pattern. And then my carbs are coming more from squashes and sweet potatoes and things of
Hmm.
that nature, because I found that my body was extremely sensitive to any crackers, chips, things of that
Yeah.
nature that I love and would mow like down on, especially like after the end of a hard day at work or something that stressed me out. So
Yeah.
this is a big deal. It's a really big deal.
And let alone if the pattern of having those late night carb eatings is like totally out of sync with what our normal circadian rhythm would be, where towards the end of the day, the last thing our body metabolism would want is to have jacked up
Yeah.
high metabolic demands, let alone
Yeah.
tons of sugar when we're trying to like get the system to like chill
Yes.
and relax and
Yes.
like restore and have lower insulin and higher growth hormones. So late night high carbohydrates. And I'll say too, like I don't know what the deal is with like sweet potatoes, but I think they work so well for many people. And I'll say like myself too, like I do really well off of them. They're a great carbohydrate to include in dinner. That's still kind of fun.
Yeah.
And there's so many things you can do with those. So plus for that, plus they have the good
So,
prebiotic fiber, which I think is a good segue into our next category, which is something that is what I think what honestly naturopathic medicine does
yeah.
as good as anything is really looking at like the digestion system as it relates to whole health, and particularly now this microbiome, this whole environment of all the different microbes, the bacteria, the fungi, all the things, the viruses even that live natively in our bodies and interface with us and our neurotransmitters. So what's going on with people's guts? Like, why are so many people having issues that we didn't see so long ago? And like, what do you believe is important just as like good prescriptive general advice for women who want to have better gut health and just healthier GI function microbiome?
Oh my goodness. I think it's the toxins in the food and the environment that are jacking with the gut
Yeah.
combined with stress, like low level stress. Because I can have
Hmm.
people eating, and myself included, I for years did have some issues with my gut, and really boiled down to realizing like, oh, wait, all of those nerves, that endocannabinoid system and the vagus nerve go all to my to my gut, right? Well, there you go. Instead of calling it IBS and being like, oh, I have IBS, no big deal. I'm like, no, wait, how can I
Hmm.
I work on looking at when I eat? And so this was another part of becoming a new person around food. I literally would eat and multitask or eat on the run, eating in front of the kitchen sink.
Hmm.
I don't even know why I had a dinner table,
Yeah.
because that's what I would do. And a lot of women are like
Yeah.
that. So for your microbiome, one of the really big things is sitting down to eat and experiencing your food, actually chewing it,
Hmm.
getting the proper signaling going. Because I find a lot of people, if they eat too fast, that's messing with the microbiome too. I think our microbiomes are like, hey,
Yeah.
could you slow down a minute? I could handle things if you didn't just dump it all in at once. So
Sure.
I'm big on spending time enjoying your food, treating every meal like you are at the best French restaurant in a cafe patio somewhere
Yeah.
beautiful, because I think we've lost that from our foundational health. So that's one of my biggies in
Yeah.
terms of things. Yes, I recommend probiotics, and I will do in certain cases certain microbiome shifting if I think I need to, but honestly, the basics there. I love Tributyrin for helping with colons in
Mm-hmm.
particular, especially ladies with a little bit more towards the constipated side of things as we get into this stage of life. It's it's so huge to think about, like, okay, how can we seal up our gut lining? How can we make it, just a little better? I love BPC 157, the peptide, for those
Yeah,
types of things. So I go higher end on those. Tributyrin and BPC are kind of my two if I'm gonna introduce something. And then
that's awesome.
fermented foods are, I have people eating fermented foods for their probiotics, kind of going back and
Mm-hmm.
digging in the dirt, get that soil going.
Yeah.
Get
I think
that.
that's really beautiful because you're operating on like a very high level here. And what I love about the microbiome is like it can self regulate as long as it's not getting disrupted.
Yeah.
And that's like just how it works. So getting all the non-organic grains out of your life, like if you're having pesticide sprayed wheat or corn or soy, and that's I think a big problem with all of the fake plant foods too,
Yeah.
is they're using like GMO atrazine sprayed soy, and no wonder it's like screwing you up majorly among other things. So
Yeah.
get those offenders out. And then we talked about parasympathetic. So what you described was so brilliant because it's like I'm going to eat food and I'm going to get myself into a parasympathetic state so it's received well, it's slower, and it's a chance to kind of like restore. And this is another benefit. Like we know now for metabolic health, you don't have to eat all these frequent meals. Like you can have a really nice meal that you can sit down and enjoy, and like you can have regulated blood sugar for a long time afterwards. There's some people who eat one meal a day, 2 meals a day,
Yeah.
but like if you can have that time be a little more intentional, that seems like a really good option. And then sneaking in those probiotics and prebiotics with the fermented foods and all that, just getting it through food sources. And for those who aren't privy, like what you said about
Mm-hmm.
Tributyrin, I think it'd be fun to
Sure.
unpack that a little bit and relate
Mm-hmm.
it to butter and butyric acid in general, because I think people need to learn more about like that powerful signaling molecule that we find in certain foods, and also the fiber connection with that and what that all is.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah, Tributyrin, it's kind of, I guess, for lack of a better term, Tributyrin is the marketed term for it. But what it is it's encapsulated butyric acid. Because guys, if you had the old school capsules, we're lucky this day and age, because probably Dr. Anthony remembers the old butyric acid capsules that smelled like rotten butter. They're pretty gross.
Yeah, it smells like rotten stuff. Yeah.
Just not good. And trying to get someone to take those, like, even worse. I almost was, in a camp of like, hey, can we just get you to eat some butter? So butyric acid is
Mm-hmm.
one of the main things in butter. And that's why I'm like, don't do the plastic butters. Actually have the grass-fed, good,
Yeah.
solid butter, because this is a molecule that your little colon cells make. They love it. They love it to help keep themselves healthy, and it helps with moving the
Yeah.
bowels along. And so I love Tributyrin now that it's been designed enough to be able to get the capsules now will get you past the stomach and the intestines and into the colon, so we could target specifically the colon with those. And I can't say enough about those. And one thing I will mention too, because I didn't before, and I think we should mention it, is all the fake sugars too, the 0-calorie stuff,
Yeah.
like the sucraloses and things.
For sure.
Ladies, these
They
are not
wreck
your
your GI
friends.
tract. Yeah.
The Diet Coke
Mm-hmm.
addiction, gosh help us. Gosh help us on that. So
Mm-hmm.
these things, Tributyrin is what I will often use when I find out that someone is coming off of a diet soda addiction or any of the things that have sucralose or any of the fake sugars. I'm still not even a fan
Yeah.
of stevia unless it's green powder from the leaves that you actually sprinkle
Mm-hmm.
into something. Otherwise, it's processed. Monk fruit, I'm sure it doesn't come out white and powdery. So, pretty sure it's
Yeah.
processed. So these are the other things to be thinking about. So that's Tributyrin. And then do you want me to talk about BPC? Should I describe the BPC?
Yeah, I think it'd
peptide?
be cool. Please.
So BPC sounds like a German U-boat. It is actually called body protective complex. They're tiny little protein fragments that you make in your body, but we've figured out how to isolate it. Yes, it's synthetic, but we figured out how to isolate it. And this stuff, oh my gosh, game changer for the gut. And really for those of
Yeah.
you who have tried like glutamine and you've tried, so the amino acid glutamine, you've tried bone broths and you've tried that and you don't seem to be getting anywhere, BPC, just a game changer for that. It helps with tendon and ligaments too, but I can't say enough about it. I would say that for a lot of women who just can't seem to get things dialed in, BPC kind of just solidifies everything. It's good stuff. It's good
And
stuff.
it's oral. You can get it in capsules, which is so nice. And imagine stacking that with like something like the butyric acid, the better
Mhm.
forms. Like that's solid. And I would say like obviously that's a healing protocol, but
Yes.
it could be good to just run that once in a while. It's like those are both like healthy things. I mean, BPC is probably something you more cycle, but overall, like really good.
Yeah.
And if you have kids too that have any attention deficit disorder, mood disorders, got to improve their gut function. And both of those things could be beneficial.
Absolutely, absolutely, and yes, I would cycle BPC, do a month on and a couple months off if you're gonna do it. I typically for women, what I'll do with it is based on where they're at in their perimenopausal cycle. If they've come off like a rough month, we'll do a BPC round there. Or if someone's more athletic and they're running marathons or they're training for something, I will tend to do a
Hmm.
BPC then, just because anyone who's an athlete will have more stress on the gut. And especially if you are a marathon or
Yep.
biker for some reason, those two hobbies, I see rough gut stuff.
Yep.
So
Nice. Okay. The final bit is I know we've already covered a lot,
yeah.
but I think I'd be remiss not to ask you this based on your experiences. You use some cool technologies in your practice to measure things, peg some data.
Mhm.
Like, what would you share that's accessible for everyone who may doesn't have necessarily the fancy tech stuff that you may have, or anything that you think is like very relevant for people to track, or trackers or tech stuff that you like? And it doesn't always have to be tracking. It could be some kind of light device, but you love the tech side too, which I think is super cool. So speak a little bit into that. I think everyone would benefit.
Ooh, picking one. Um, hmm, 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 hmm.
You could pick more than one. I know I said one, but like a couple of heavy headers or stuff that you think is like really valuable and good for tech. That's also fairly
Yeah.
accessible.
Yeah, actually probably one of the best things that I love is the Lumen. It is a breath sensing device. It senses your carbon dioxide in your breath and it can tell if you're in carb or fat burn. And really it was a game changer for me to help with my clients to really, answer the question, "Doc, what do I eat?" And it's like, "Well, let's teach you
Hmm.
what you eat. Your body's going to tell you right here." And in some cases with more severe insulin resistance, I'll pair it with the levels levels is a membership for those of you guys that don't know for continuous glucose monitors, or I'll just get prescribe someone
Hmm.
a continuous glucose monitor so that we can see in real time what's going on with the blood sugar and pair it with carb fat burn to give us an idea of like what's your fasting window. Because when you would ask me about food,
Yeah.
I think everyone has their own window of what works best depending on where they're at in their
Yeah.
cycle and depending on where they're at in life with your fasting window. So the Lumen's probably my favorite, which anyone can get a hold of. It's a membership based app. Now, if you're like, I don't know if I want necessarily something of that nature, maybe you're more into trying to just nail down your cycle a little bit better. An old school calendar, the free ones you get that you don't really know what to do with, you can track on those.
Yeah.
So huge, not necessarily technology, but I have paired those with something called the temp drop. It's a band that you put on your arm and you sleep with it overnight and it senses your temperature. It doesn't emit EMFs. It's literally just a sensor here that's
That's
pulling.
awesome.
Yeah, and so you take it off in the morning and you sync it with your phone and it tells you what your temperatures are so that you can identify exactly when you're ovulating, or if you're not ovulating and you're on this roller coaster, we can look at that and go, all right, this is where your period started. This is where, the next cycle came. What do things look like? Where should we intervene with either bioidentical hormones, herbs, BPC, all the things? Because if we can take what you've tracked in terms of your habits, your routines, what your body's triggered to do, even emotional eating. I have people track that. I have people track gas and bloating. I have people track all of their different hot flashes, et cetera, symptoms. And then if we lay it out on a chart in front of you, matching with your temperature, we can basically look and go, oh, you ovulated there. So that means this is the first half of your cycle. This is the second. And then we
Yeah.
intervene. That's probably my second favorite because I know a lot of people, not many people
Hmm.
come into me and is like, hey, doc, I want to figure out how to figure out my cycle. Nobody says nobody
Yeah.
ever. It's more, what do I
Yeah.
eat? What do I
For
do?
sure.
So yeah, I like
Well, I
those.
think this is a really nice, it's a perfect segue here into like the fact that you literally do help people do this and you do it in an online format. So
Mhm.
if someone listened to this up to this point and they actually would like to explore working with you and actually getting your support to dial in like the more advanced tracking aspect of this paired with the foundational stuff we covered, please tell people where they can check you out on your website and some of the stuff that you have going on there.
Yes, absolutely. You can go over to Doctor Spelled Out, JKRAUSE, N is in Nancy, D is in dog for ND.com. So Dr. J Krause, ND.com. That's where I've got all my details. I've got a quiz you can take to see kind of where you might be, accelerating your aging. I also am pretty active on Instagram at Dr. Dr. Jannine, Jannine, Krause, Krause. And of course, there is my podcast, the Health Fix Podcast, where I talk about anything and everything, and I have Dr. Anthony on as well.
Nice. Well, thank you. I mean, I would call this truly like a power hour. Like
Sure.
we covered a ton here, and I really appreciate your wisdom and the fact that you make this stuff fun. I smiled and laughed like the whole time. So that was
Good.
really good. And I just appreciate your energy and educating our community and everyone. The links to this stuff will also be in the show notes wherever you're watching or listening to this episode. So, Dr. J, thank you for your time today and your wisdom. We appreciate you.
Thank you, Dr. Anthony. I appreciate you too.